Bangalore, the Chennai Center for China Studies, and the Press Institute of India, let me extend to all of you a very warm welcome. I'm Sashi Nair from the Press Institute of India. Mr. Heblika and Commodore Vasan are there also on the screens. They represent ICSB and C3S. So welcome to this two-day virtual conference. The focus being on cyber security and securing India against the backdrop of what we have labeled Deciphering China. This, incidentally, is the second of a four-part series that we had planned. The first, exactly a month ago, was a sort of curtain raiser called Deciphering China. And there too, we had a session devoted to cybersecurity. I must mention here, for those who are not aware, that ICSB, C3S, and PII, our association goes back quite a long way when we started programs on national security and foreign policy in 2012 or thereabout. And we've conducted several programs so far over the years. The only difference being that since the last program, it's been a virtual sort of a conference, and we are looking forward to many more as the months go by. Some of those who attended the last conference had asked me, what exactly is it that your three organizations do? And for the benefit of them, if they are tuned in today, and for those who are here, let me just run through what these organizations do. The Institute of Contemporary Studies, Bangalore, is a multidisciplinary think tank. It has four broad areas of expertise, namely to conduct specific seminars and workshops on issues related to national security, international relations, regional and local issues. The second being to conduct professional training for government agencies, public sector undertakings, and the corporate sector. The third, to undertake risk analysis. And the fourth, to associate with like-minded organizations, universities, colleges, on national security issues. The ICSB's activities have remained focused on India's national security at one level, and it brings in some sort of synergy on specific subjects related to energy security, cyber security, information security, climate security, etc., and also developments in India's neighborhood. Mr. Heblika heads the institute or organizations based in Bangalore. The Chennai Center for China Studies, popularly known as C3S, is an Indian think tank that carries out research on developments in China and assigns priority to Indian policy interests. The Young Minds of C3S is an initiative taken that is designed to encourage a younger generation of China-oriented scholars to contribute to the academic and technical conversation around the subject of China and Indo-China relations. C3S was ranked the 30th best think tank in 2018 among 90 think tanks considered from Japan, South Korea, China, and India in a think tank survey conducted by Think Tanks and Civil Societies program. And so that is something to be proud about. And leading them from the front is Commodore Seshadri Vasan. Finally, the Press Institute of India has its origins in New Delhi. 1963 was when it was founded. It's an independent non-profit organization established to create and sustain high and responsible standards of journalism through its various programs and publications. Although in today's context, we are actually having a tough battle, I must add. It is run by a board of trustees that includes some of India's leading news publishing houses. I don't want to name them now, but you can look at our website and find out who they are. PII's training workshops for journalists are focused on a range of issues, from development journalism, women empowerment, child rights, to national security, foreign policy, and also the basic writing, reporting, and editing workshops. The Institute has trained thousands of journalists from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and other parts of Asia, and offered fellowships as well. So that then is the background of the three organizations. For those who haven't got the updated program, let me point out that Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant, scheduled to speak at the opening, has sought to speak at 11:30 a.m. So we'll wait for that. But meanwhile, we'll start or kickstart the webinar with a session titled India's Cyber Security Management. I will invite Mr. Pratap Heblika, the Managing Trustee of the ICSB, to chair the session and to introduce the panelists. But before that, I must also point out here that this program or putting together this program has taken quite a bit of time and effort. And I must specifically point to three people here who represent CyberWiz: Suresh Bulusu, Samir Akseka, and Munjal Shroff. So I must extend a warm welcome especially to them, and we must thank them for putting together what looks to be a different kind of a program, the highlight of which is likely to be the one that will follow later in the day, what is called the tabletop exercise. So we all look forward to that. So let me introduce Mr. Heblika. He's the Managing Trustee of ICSB. He retired as Special Secretary to the Government of India in September 2010 after 38 years of service. A specialist in insurgency and counterinsurgency in India's northeast region, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. He has supervised China-related work and developments in South Asia and Southeast Asia. He has held several sensitive appointments both at headquarters and in the field. He was decorated twice for meritorious service in 1995 and distinguished service in 2002. An alumnus of St. Joseph's College in Bangalore and Central College, Bangalore, he is currently visiting professor at Manipal University and adjunct faculty at the National Institute of Advanced Studies in Bangalore. Mr. Heblika is associated with several corporate entities and others in an advisory capacity and also on cyber-related issues. And I must also add here that he's been the driving force behind this series of programs, and especially this one on cyber security. Over to you, sir. You're muted, Mr. Heblika.
Thank you, Shashi. Good morning to all. Firstly, let me thank you for the introduction to the different institutes that are taking part, to the people who are going to be present, and also to the program. So we now have a sketch map of what is going to happen today and tomorrow. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank all those who are with us today, having spared their time to join us on a subject which is of vital national importance and interest to all of us. I might probably tread over some of the points which you mentioned, but I would like to bring it to the notice of people who are joining in now, that this webinar was conceived as an outcome-based event in the backdrop of sharp deteriorations in India-China relations, especially since April-May 2020. Deciphering China is an important aspect for anybody who wants to be in the mainstream of understanding, analysis, and assessment of what China means to us. Some 30, 40 years ago, not much of information was emanating from China. And with the onset of liberalization, globalization, and privatization, China is much more open today. As a consequence, we have much more information, exponential availability of information for us on China on a daily basis. So this, therefore, makes it difficult for people who understand China, how to assess China, how to sift the fact from the chaff, and how to make it worthwhile to understand what China is all about. When we talk about China, we talk about the Chinese Communist Party, which is the main driving force. We had planned 4 webinars on this particular title, Deciphering China. keeping in view what is happening now, what is going to happen in the future, and how are we in India prepared to meet these challenges, and how are we going to help our neighboring countries to help understand the kind of threats that bear down on them. So the webinar took several weeks to be put together, and I must say that I'm very grateful to some of my colleagues who are on the screen today and who will be joining us in the course of the program today and tomorrow. We had basically 4 webinars to attend, to bring forth. The first one was on September 29th and 30th. He talked about India-China relations. He talked about the Chinese Communist Party, its national security doctrines, its objectives, and its interests, and how what are China's tangible interests and intangible interests in today's world. And what is India's response to it? How does all this mirror on India? And where are we on that point? So we had some extraordinary speakers in the first webinar, right, ranging right from the best who had served in the country, who spoke the language and who had understood Chinese from the very beginning of their careers. In the webinar that we are going to be part of today and tomorrow, we talk about Chinese exploitation of cyberspace and its threats and challenges that await the world, await us, especially India, because India is China's closest neighbor. And I think India needs to treat China as its main adversary in all aspects of our relationship. And I would say that as long as the present dispensation in China continues to be in power, or as long as President Xi Jinping continues to be head of the party, the government, and the military, India will continue to face rumblings in its relationship with China. So we need to hunker down for next several years to keep a sharp eye on what China is doing. So in our program on cyberspace, we'll get to hear the best of experts in the field, people drawn from the civil and military life, media, researchers, and people who have actually practiced cybersecurity in a very defined manner. Following this, we have 2 more webinars, again focused on China and its maritime dimensions, and Chinese media landscape. These are all the areas where China seems to be leveraging its strength and also the focusing on the weaknesses of its smaller neighbors. I will not want to take much more time, because I would like to give as much to the panelists to tell us, to enlighten us on what lies ahead. But I would like to make only 3 points at this juncture. That we need to understand that while efforts are being made to indigenize and to Indianize our structures, we also need to understand that there is a form of fifth column that exists in India that prevents our movement in that direction of self-sufficiency in technology, and how these Trojan horses are carrying out the bidding wittingly or unwittingly of their, of the vested interest elsewhere. The second point I would like to make is that there is going to be a greater requirement of public-private partnership. Rapid digitalization without adequate safety net or safeguards is creating a massive impact on our national security infrastructure. And we need to see how we can bring into this focus our own energies, knowledge, and technology. And lastly, through this webinar, we would also like to see what are the new technologies and strategies that are available to make us much more self-sufficient, not only in this space of cyber, but also elsewhere. Without taking too much of time, I would now like to turn to my panelists. I'm blessed that I have an extraordinary panel of distinguished professionals. I will start with Rear Admiral Kohli, who was in the Indian Navy, worked for 35 years, a man who was an alumnus of the National Defense College, who spent his professionalization as in the IT field and held several sensitive appointments whilst in the Navy. Commodore Kale, in his presentation, will look at the critical pillars of India's national security management and will also suggest a way ahead to make digital network resilient to cyber attack and data exploitation. After Admiral Kale's presentation, then we have Mr. Pavitran Rajan, an alumnus of the National Defense Academy. While serving in the Army, he did pioneering work in cyber intelligence and information warfare. After taking retirement, he has continued his interest in this field. And he works for a number of think tanks on the same field, besides being a member on board of 2 private institutions. He will cover the principle of cyberspace as commons that has been propagated since the inception of the internet, and how India accepting this has allowed China to make inroads into India and the strategic vulnerabilities thereof. To balance our panel, we have 2 young ladies, each distinguished in her field. We would like to welcome Namrata Biji Ahuja to the platform. Namrata works for The Week. Anybody who's read The Week will know that she has been a prolific contributor in the field of national security on cyber space and the technologies that go with it. Apart from being a very prolific journalist, she has also had several recognitions coming in her way, and we are indeed very happy that she is going to join us today. Namrata's focus on today would be to highlight how threats from China have evolved based on the new strategies of the People's Liberation Army, and whether India has been able to build a robust centralized system to counter them. One thing which I would like Namrata to tell us about the Huawei 5G core network and how critical is it to the PLA, and how critical is it that we need to ensure that we don't have these influences in our forthcoming 5G network era. Last but not the least, from far off in Singapore, we have Dr. Anuradha Rao, PhD from the National University of Singapore, and an MPhil from JNU Delhi, and an alumnus of Mount Carmel College in Bangalore. She did her PhD in new media and communications. She set up her own company called Cyber Cognizance, which talks about cyber awareness, and she conducts workshops for corporates and netizens and produces online courses for issues like cyber safety, cyber security awareness, cyber bullying, and such items that are related. Her other forte is to talk about issues related to fake news, disinformation, misinformation, and how we need to be sifting fact from fiction. So without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the panel. And I now request Admiral Kale to kindly start the proceedings. Please note that each of you have 15 minutes. And at the end of it, we have a question answer session. Thereafter, some of our queries perhaps would be answered by General Pant, the National Security Advisor, who will be joining us at 11:15. So we have enough time. So without wasting my time, I would like to welcome Admiral Kale to the table. Thank you. Admiral Kale? Sanjeev, you're muted. You'd unmute yourself, please.
He's still on mute.
I can't see him.
You can't see me?
No, I can't. Yeah, there he is. So Sanjeev, you're on. Welcome.
Yeah, I am on, but I am trying to share my presentation. Give me a minute, please.
Yeah.
Is my presentation seen now? Hello?
No,
not yet, sir.
not yet.
Not yet.
So you have to share your screen.
Okay.
You have to go to present
Yeah, I
now and
was
share your
just
screen.
trying to do that.
Okay.
If not possible, I can play the deck from my end, sir. That should not be an issue.
Yeah, can you do, Bala, please, can you do that?
Sure, sir. Just opening. 1 second, sir.
So while Bala is, helping me in sharing my presentation, good morning to all of you, to Mr. Shashi Nair, my session chair, Mr. Heblika, distinguished participants and my panelists, ladies and gentlemen. I must start by saying that I am indeed honored to be part of this conference on deciphering China, cybersecurity, and securing India. A subject which is so very topical today in the backdrop of the recent ransomware attack which we have had on one of the India's largest pharmaceutical company, Dr. Reddy's. This underscores the fact that as a nation, not only the government networks, we need to be more prepared with regard to our infrastructure and private sector also. I'm as an opening batsman, because I know over the next few hours and tomorrow, there'll be a lot of China which will be spoken about. I intend to briefly touch on how our cyberspace can be exploited by China, and then go on to the pillars of cybersecurity and give some suggestions with regard to the cybersecurity. There is, however, a caveat that my presentation today is based on perceptions, because my study or the presentation is based on open source, and I'm not privy to the happenings which are there in the government, which I'm sure General Pant and his team, as and when they participate, would probably like to tell us. I would like to admit that last few years has seen a spate of activities from the government with regard to the cybersecurity initiatives. Government has also not shied away from addressing the elephant in the room, which is the threat from China, cybersecurity threat from China. And in my opinion, government can only be an enabler, and the responsibility of ensuring cybersecurity of our space lies on the individuals and the administrative machinery, which is mandated to implement policies and directives. In my presentation, as we go through, I will give an example which will highlight this fact that despite policy directives, how so-called fifth statesmen frustrate the policy directives and government efforts. So I'll start by saying that all connected devices and networks are vulnerable. It's a very sweeping statement, and the experts here will agree with that. And a degree of cybersecurity which such a space offers is decided by its intrinsic design, adaptive and nimble state policies, resources deployed, and time taken to respond to discovered vulnerabilities. Next, please. So in brief, how can China exploit our cyberspace and affect our cybersecurity? The biggest threat is with regard to the data of individuals, which we know are being passed down to through the China's mobiles and apps to their servers in China. And these can be used for behavioral engineering, espionage, and to influence response of major national and international events. Few days back, there was a news article which said that top businessmen are being monitored by China, and their social space activities are being monitored by Chinese agencies. It makes it that is a case in point. Then exploitation of networks and devices for denial of service using published and unpublished unpatched vulnerabilities. I will come to this in my presentation. And possibility of embedding backdoors in Chinese supplied hardware for use at a later date, which is akin to sleeper cells, which Mr. Hebleker is very well aware of. Next, please. So according to me, the three pillars which affect the cybersecurity management are the networks, their design and hardware, policy and regulatory framework, and the resources we can bring to bear to improve our cybersecurity management. Next, please. So where do we stand? I would like to do some plain speak. Our networks have grown organically. They were not designed with cybersecurity in mind and have heavy dependence on imported components like switches and routers. Now, most of the switches and routers use operating systems which are foreign to us. We do not have, as a nation, we do not have control over over those operating systems, and we do not have these operating systems accentuate vulnerabilities. There are possibilities of backdoors, and we are dependent on these companies for patching up of vulnerabilities which are discovered and published. On the policy and regulatory front, lack of overarching legal mandated policy framework, specifically relating to cybersecurity and data protection. Government is itself little hesitant about going all out with regard to data protection, because government is one of the biggest users of public data, individual data. And I can understand the dilemma they face themselves in, that if they decide to bring out some very stringent laws with regard to data protection, they might find themselves at the receiving end. Then there is excessive dependence on government agencies for certification, for analysis, for response, and this results in a non-level playing field for the private sector. I am of the firm belief that there is tremendous talent available in the private sector or in the space which is beyond the government space, and the capabilities of such individuals and institutions need to be brought together to address this critical issue. Again, there is no formal mandate for ethical hacking, legal support to ethical hackers, and a lack of good Samaritan law in case of cybersecurity. Next, please. So now, commitment at national level, I think though policies have been issued, we need to establish an office of ombudsman for quick adjudication of representation and implementation of Atmanirbhar policy. It will come to light why I am focusing on Atmanirbhar. Punitive measures against personnel drawing up anti-Atmanirbhar specs, and requirement to draw India-specific policies and regulatory regulations and requirements. Next. Bala, next please. So most of us in this nation believe, one back please. Yeah, most of us in this country believe that products of reputed foreign companies are secure. This notion I would like to demolish by giving the examples which are shown. Microsoft, as late as 13th October, issued a patch for 47 vulnerabilities, out of which 2 are categorized as serious. Cisco, Juniper, and the likes have unpatched vulnerabilities which are publicly available on sites like cvedetails.com, and they can be used, such vulnerabilities before they are patched can be used by the hackers. And there is, again, I'm emphasizing, there is a huge lobby in favor of certain products, certain companies, which we need to see through and address. Next, please. So this just gives a, this detail is from cv.com, and in 2019, only denial of service vulnerabilities with respect to these 3 companies. These are the published vulnerabilities. Next. Now, I would like to show this case study where I say that the implementation is lacking and why there needs to be a hard-fisted policy for implementation of government directives. Coincidentally, this is from Tamil Nadu, the place from where this conference is originating now. There was a tender this year for Tamil Nadu BharatNet, which was meant to connect 12,524 gram panchayats under a centrally sponsored scheme. Now, though issued in 2020, early 2020, it did not have the Make in India clause. So the company system integrators represented and central government intervened, and it was retendered. The project required supply of hardware, laying of fiber optic circuits, cables, and integration effort. And I am taking one particular deliverable, which is the routers. That presentation has gone, Bala. Yogesh is presenting. Yogesh? Okay, I'll read out. Yeah, the one of the deliverables was a gigabit router, which had a requirement of 4 10 gig ports. After the hue and cry, tender was reissued with a Make in India clause. But see how the, next please, how the system got manipulated again. Bala, can you put the next slide, please? No. Yeah. So when it was issued, the specifications for the routers got changed from 4 into 10 gig ports to 6 into 10 gig ports. Now, what are the consequences? The cost per router has gone up by at least 20,000. So approximately 24,000 additional expenditure. Change of specs blatantly support a company. And the reason is that Indian companies, some Indian companies and Juniper and Nokia, etc., they have proven 4-port gigabit routers. So they have been excluded. Now, if this tender goes through as it is, then obviously one company routers will get fielded. And this, of course, it's a foreign company. Now, there is no justification of changing this specification because we have only 2 networks in Gram Panchayat, 2 fiber optic networks in each Gram Panchayat. You can have 2 redundancy. There is no justification about changing the specs to 6 ports, especially when it appears that it has been done to keep domestic companies or indigenous companies away. Now, what are the solutions? Next. So I come to my recommendations with regard to solutions, that there is a requirement of paradigm shift in evaluation of networks, computes, and application infra. The paradigm needs to look at configurations and networks from security perspective rather than legacy method of number of deployments, years of existence, and fair electronic life, which our audit always holds on to and prevents cyber security initiatives being implemented, or rather obstructs the cyber security initiatives being implemented. Next, please. There's a need to diversify security profile of communication networks. Basically, each network should use products from 2 different vendors as against single vendor. We have a L1 policy, and you have, so if all network components would be from one company, we should prevent, or we should ensure that all the network components are interoperable and they should be at least from 2 different vendors. And such networks will prevent cascading effect of an attack due to different security profiles of products fielded. Next, please. So what we should do is, with immediate effect, I know it is very difficult for the government to say that we will use only indigenous products. With immediate effect, we should say at least 50% of indigenous components should form part of all government networks. In case of air-gapped networks, which automatically are considered as critical and important networks, this should go to 80 to 100%. And this will be cost effective because indigenous production technology is relatively cheaper. We will have control over the operating system. Today, whenever reputed companies, routers and switches come, there are a host of services which are running in the background. And such services increase the threat area of that device and makes it vulnerable to exploitation. And again, there will be a control over how quickly we can deliver patches and reduce the vulnerability. Next, please.
Is it visible, sir?
Yeah. Next, please. So, with regard to policy and regulatory, I have already said that there has to be a hard-fisted implementation of Atmanirbhar Bharat policy for at least for network components. We are self-sufficient with regard to the fiber optic cable, etc. We should mandate specifications to be drawn to support proven indigenous products, rather than taking specs of imported products to eliminate Indian products.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Then there is a cost advantage which is given to Indian indigenous components and firms. This cost advantage of 20% can be given to the system integrator to have flexibility in designing of the network, maybe where they will have to compromise with the specification and some additional components might have to be put in. And formation of Office of Ombudsman, as has been brought out earlier. Next, please. Then, as brought out, legal mandate for ethical hacking. We know that government does not have resources to, set up huge infrastructure where ethical hacking can take place, but definitely we can have infrastructure where all simulated government networks are available, and under controlled circumstances, declarations, we should open them to ethical hacking. It will ensure that the vulnerabilities of such networks are reduced and are patched from time to time. And provide legal protection to Good Samaritan in line with the latest amendment in Motor Vehicles Act. Next, please. Again, there are PSUs and DPSUs which have got huge electronic PCB manufacturing facilities. A case in point is ECIL and BEL. These high-class PCB, multi-layered PCB fabrication facilities, which are secure in nature, with traceability, everything, are used once in 5 years just before elections to make electronic voting machines. And they lie idle and suboptimally utilized the rest of the time. I think government can mandate use of such facilities for manufacture of indigenous devices. Again, it will drive down the cost and will optimally utilize these facilities. Another point which I would like to bring out and which experts might comment on during their presentation or question answer is that I have noticed that not only foreign apps, but Indian apps do not give you access unless you agree to all the conditions. The only big multinationals have started giving the choice of how much data you want to share with regard to location, etc., etc. But most of the apps do not give user that choice. I do not know how it can be mandated, but we need to have a serious look at this and probably frame some regulations where the choice of sharing of data should remain with the user of the application. Next, please.
Sanjeev, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'll finish. So I've just paraphrased the Good Samaritan policy, which is there in the Motor Vehicles Act, which has been brought out, amended in 2019, which is in red. A person who in good faith, voluntarily and without expectations of reward or compensation, takes up steps to ascertain existence of vulnerability, reports it to the owner of the network or to National Cyber Security Emergency Response Team. I think we need to protect such people. I personally know of a lot of institutions who have come across such vulnerabilities but are hesitant to report because of they do not know what will be the consequences. Next. With regard to resources, I would say that India is neither China with unfettered controls, nor it is United States with the ability to deploy huge resources towards cybersecurity. The solution to deal with cybersecurity, therefore, has to be India specific. And there is a shortage of resources and talent in government space, which can be made good by the next 4 points which have been shown here. Next, please. I would conclude by saying that ensuring cyber security is everybody's responsibility, everyone's, every individual's. In the Indian context, government support can be expected towards establishment of regulatory framework, providing enabling environment and centralized facilities. Mandating induction of indigenous network products, data localization, data security laws would be essential for bolstering the efforts. Thank you. I've finished.
Thank you, Sanjeev. I think in the time that allotted to you, I think you have been able to tell us what exactly is the issue and what could be the solutions ahead. And that, like you said, importantly, that all of us are stakeholders in national security, and it devolves on us to ensure that whatever we do has one outcome, that it is in favor of India. Thank you. We will take questions and answers at the end of the panel discussion. May I now call upon Pavitra and Rajan, please, to address the participants. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. I hope I'm audible.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm now trying to play this, yeah, I hope my screen is also visible. because now I can't see any one of you.
Perfect, sir. It's visible, sir.
Okay, great. So firstly, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm indeed grateful and humbled. And, I've got this excellent speaker, Admiral Kohli, who has given a beautiful overview of what is wrong. So let me now take you about 60,000 feet into the air to understand what are the fundamental issues. Because when I came into this field, I realized that we are the victim of narratives which has been, very nicely created by people over decades, and this can't be overturned in, in a very short time frame. But when I hung my boots from the army and became an advisor with the Ministry of Affairs, one thing which helped me was the Snowden revelations. So in the field of cyber, there is before Snowden and after Snowden. And once Snowden came, I knew that I had a small little chance, which I think now is possible, provided people are, aware of what are the challenges. Now, to demystify cyber, because India, or most of the world is run by people who are above their 60s, okay, 65, 70. These are the people who run this world. And for them, cyberspace is mysterious. They will listen carefully, but they do not understand most of what is being talked about. So one of my endeavors has been to try and demystify. And for that reason, let me now take you into a little bit of history and make you understand how this world works. So I take you to another admiral. This is Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan, who first talked about global commons. He was the first guy to use the word commons, the fabric or connective tissue of the international system, which extends into the sea, air, space. That time cyberspace was not there, but the term commons was originally coined by Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan. He foresaw today, okay, about 100 years back, he saw the latent potential of China. And he looked at China, and at that time, the population of China was 400 million. And he said, once this nation becomes industrially aware and scientifically the equivalent of Western powers, we will not be able to contain them, and we need to invest into it. And today, the world order, mostly what you see, was created by the West with an aim to contain China. Okay? Not only China, but other nations too, but China especially, because they saw that as the biggest threat. I have just put this particular slide to show you the sea lanes of communication where the trade happens. Okay, and this numbers which you see on the screen, these are the millions of barrels of oil which flow through those. Okay, this is dated to 2004 when I wrote this paper, The Fallacy of the Cyber Commons. If you Google it out, you'll be able to get that paper and go through it. But this was just to teach our own strategic community the challenges of and make them understand the what are the challenges in cyberspace. So these show roughly the millions of barrels of oil which go through, and you will see two places which are prominent. One is the Strait of Malacca, and the other is the Strait of Hormuz. These basically show where the two strategic choke points, because the rest of the sea lanes of communication actually are much smaller when you compare it with these two particular choke points. And you will find the vulnerability of China is this. If you look at this screen, you will find South China Sea and this entire trade. Okay, these are the maritime trade routes to China. Almost 90% of China's trade, they are a trading nation, goes through the Straits of Malacca. The other straits, Lombok and Sunda, etc., are some minor ores which come into China. Okay, but this Malacca Strait, if you look at it, that is the choke point. And the Chinese people are the Communist Party is a strategic community, because they actually captured power, unlike our founding fathers who inherited, I would say, gifted independence. These people had to capture power, and they are more strategically attuned to what does it take to defend a nation. And if you look at this, you will realize that to break out of this Malacca Strait, because you who have got Japan in the north, you've got Taiwan, you've got all these other nations which the British and the Americans have carefully, ensured stay as part of their, stay in their part of the, playground, let me put it. Wherein China feels constrained. They know that they can be threatened, they can be choked. So that is why they are trying to create that, road, the CPEC, via POK into through Pakistan, and to break out of this, okay, so that they have alternate routes. And CPE and the rest of the BRI also is in one way trying to break out of this Malacca Strait and also enhance its economy. Now, why is this significant? So there you have, there is this MIT professor, Barry Posint, 2003, who said that the command of the commons is the key enabler of US global power position. So in the olden days, imperial powers used to come, capture, invade into nations, set up their own governments or proxy governments and extract wealth. In present times, that is no longer acceptable. Like slavery got banned. So imperialism is also not appreciated. So what do? They just try and project power into the commons, the fabric which holds the world together, the oceans primarily. The America has got the biggest, that is why it's the biggest naval power. And if a nation does not fall in line, they try to choke access of nations. So for example, Iran. So Iran, since it is not falling in line, today the US has unilaterally choked, their trade, their economy, and slowly persuade that nation to come into line to what the global hegemon wants it to. So commons, this is the definition: a space in the international system over which states do not exercise the normal prerogatives of sovereignty, to which now provide for universal access for economic, political, scientific, cultural, and sometimes military purposes. Now that last part is key for those states with the requisite technological capabilities. So to make you understand the strategic significance, the value of world trade as per 2014 figures, when I dug it out, was US dollar 18 trillion. Sea was 70% by value and 80% by volume. Air was 20% by value and 1% by volume, mostly smartphones, etc., etc. And land was 10% by value and 19% by volume. Oh, and there you have this cyberspace. The transactions via SWIFT, okay, was US dollar 10 trillion per day. Now, when you think about it from that point of view, and this SWIFT, it doesn't capture the whole significance of cyberspace. Cyberspace is the, in one way, you can call it the nervous system of the modern world. So it is not only the money, it is everything, your daily functioning, even what we are doing, everything is controlled. When we are right now talk, is controlled via cyberspace. And any power which can dominate this will then dominate the world. So here is, I've also captured, these are our undersea fiber cables which come and deliver your internet connectivity. And most of it is via more than 90% is via Mumbai. Although we are now very focused on Leh is just, in one way, a piece of land which has it does have huge strategic significance, but it doesn't affect you. But something on those cables will affect all of us, immediately. So there you are. The global critical infrastructures are composed of both public and private institutions. I've just, what have you, banking, finance, chemicals, energy, transportation, telecommunications, everything is out there. And that is why, cyberspace has been described as a strategic high ground of the 21st century. And the Chinese declaring their intentions to concentrate on cyberspace and information warfare to defend itself and also break through the hegemony which today the Western powers have. So the first guy to talk about cyber commons was this gentleman, another admiral, Vice Admiral Arthur Sebreski, when he headed the Pentagon's Office of Force Transformation. He compared the cyberspace commons to the maritime commons of the 19th and the 20th century, suggesting that cyberspace will be the most important strategic commons of the 21st century. But there are significant differences to cyberspace. Firstly, it is not it's an artificial construct. It's a creation of, it's a space which has been created by humans. And unlike other domains, to create a navy, they say you need a century. To create an army, maybe much lesser time. Air Force, slightly more time. Cyberspace, the entry barriers are very low. Anyone with a laptop or a smartphone can get into cyberspace, any kid. And he can make a difference because if he can code, and he can make a difference out there. And why is this so significant? Because unlike the domains of nuclear and space, where the state needs to put in a lot of resources, in cyberspace, the best and the brightest will never work for the state. They will not work in a bureaucracy and rise gradually. The brilliant guys might work in a corporate for some time, but most of them start up their own companies. And that is the reason why public-private partnership is so significant. And in fact, our DPSUs and our PSUs are one of the fundamental reasons why India is not a cyber power, because they have curated policy in such a way that the Indian private sector cannot, exert itself at all. So characteristics, I've just put it into this particular slide. It's basically, information, physical and information layer. There is also there are people who say these are the two fundamental layers. There are people who argue that there is a cognitive layer. Cognitive layer, I belong to the set of guys who mostly talk about the physical and information layer, because the cognitive layer cannot be empirically captured, and it is further, if you look at it, it flows out of the information layer. But cyberspace is also a venue for military activity. So now let's come to China. So we come back to China, the central part of China. China, with 700 million plus population, is the largest online market in cyberspace. They did not foresee weaponization of, cyberspace by the US, before Snowden. But since the Communist Party of China was very a Western pass, they, constructed the Great Firewall of China. And that gave them advantages, because unlike India, where we opened up everything and we were so trusting of everyone and calling everyone, China, created their own firewall. And I remember just about a decade plus back, there were a lot of articles about India being a superpower in this cyber domain, etc., etc. China, no one mentioned it. Today, no one says that. We remain, although people did say about cyber coolies, today, there is no doubt at all we have remained cyber coolies, while China has suddenly burst out and they have become a superpower in cyberspace. They created giant corporations, Alibaba, Sina, Huawei, ZTE, they all with strategic significance. India did not, because our ITES industry sabotaged the narrative. A lot of our people joined in it and got taken over, some wittingly, a lot of them unwittingly. So when you look at, this is again a picture of digital inroads into China, and there, if you look at India, we are totally colonized in one way. Chinese appliances are all over India, and not a single word of protest till the time they came to LAC and just went 2, 3, 10 kilometers. Okay, thank God they did that, because now we start looking at the dangers of what is going on. There is an English saying, landing up for a gunfight with a knife. So when I look at today's, scenario of warfare, we have basically prepared ourselves for an industrial era war in the information age. That war is not going to happen the way we envisage it will be happening. Anyway, let me now come back to just about a few years back. China, led by Russia and other Central Asian countries, after Snowden proposed the Internet Code of Conduct, India backed it up. Okay, they also saw that social media helped topple regimes in the Middle East and Africa, and it could provoke social schisms in all countries, and curate elections. These were all visible quite some time back. But till the time it has come into the US, in our country, we are not even recognized this because there are powerful forces who do not want it to be recognized. In July 2015, they passed a law which says sovereignty extended into cyberspace. This is, 2 years was 2013. Nations like China and Russia and many others passed a law. We are still debating and we can't get our law ready. But we have managed to, we did a much bigger thing. We banned our currency. We also declared that we'll go and become a digital, 100% digital economy without a privacy law. Quite surprising if you. So there is this digital Silk Road.
Pavitran, you have a few minutes more.
Okay, sir. I'm just, most of it is in picture form so that it gets, yeah. So in India, what has happened? I'm very glad to hear this. Fifth columnists, which have been again and again told, fifth columnists dominate most of those decision-making bodies. That is the reason we have not been able to take that. So I've just captured that in this slide. Now, current status, there you are, heavily dependent on foreign nations and vulnerable from adversarial state-sponsored attacks. We don't have a privacy law. We have created, UIDA and many other things which push us, which make us much, much more vulnerable with hardly any steps taken other than slogans to protect us. So what was a strategic deception which took place? The free flow of data was linked to freedom of expression. And in India, you cannot, we are a free, people believe that we are a free liberal democracy. And because of which, in spite of seeing the dangers when China came in, people noticed. But then if you allow, if cyberspace is if it's a global village, why wouldn't we allow China or any other nation to come in? So how could you unilaterally just ban China? Those were the reasons why, because of the literature created by the Westerners, even the Westerners didn't, try to push. They tried to push the danger of China, but they knew that pushing the danger of China will show the rest of the world that you need to indigenize, and they did not want that. So those are the conclusions which I, have, put out there. Cyberspace is the strategic high ground of the 21st century. Immense power and immense economic wealth are created over there. Okay. Let me also show you certain other slides, which I'll just go through. Data colonialism, when we initially talked about it, people were not. But then thankfully, Yuval Noah Harari came and talked about it in WF. So people have started taking it more seriously. Top internet shutdowns of the world. India, the biggest. We have got the largest and most varied population sets in the world. Population, okay? We are divided by caste, community, religion, language, whatnot. We still don't have a data localization policy or a privacy law. There it shows. The largest companies, 2006 versus 2019. In nearly 2006, okay, there was Exxon, General Electric, a whole lot of companies, only one Microsoft, which they are in the top companies. And there have you in 2019. Aramco is there on top, okay, but all in blue, all ICT companies. And you have Chinese companies who have come up, not a single Indian company. From value add to value extraction, again, all going into ICT data. Now, about this big four, people have talked about and their influence in India. It's very important. I've just taken this slide from the big four. We do believe that we are a budding superpower, but thankful, if you look at that thing about our global per capita, it's mostly like, sub-Saharan Africa. Okay, the color is, we might be slightly above sub-Saharan Africa, but we are very, very far away from our potential because our, policies are being curated by others. Now, if you look at 2050, PwC, I've taken it out. We are definitely, in a color which we would not want to be. Even China, if you look at it, is still a middling power. The global hegemon, the Westerners still there. That is what they are the guys who are advising us how to go ahead so that we reach where they're predicting we will reach. So there are only two things in cybersecurity. First is trust and resilience. Trust is, are you from a trusted, is the technology from a trusted provider? It's like, can people who are not Indian citizens become part of the Indian military or the Indian civil service? You cannot, because you basically don't trust them because their interest will be to other nations. Likewise in cyberspace. And the second is resilience. because there is nothing called absolute security. All security systems can finally be breached. Now, when it is breached, can you heal the breach in almost real time? That is resilience. That can only happen when you own the technology. It can never happen when someone else owns the technology. So this is, I just pulled it out, lobbying by big tech in the US. That's the only figures which are available, because what China spends, we have no clue. What this big tech is spending in India also, we have no clue. Okay, but they're trying to pour a humongous amount of money to ensure this privacy, indigenization, data localization, data sovereignty does not happen. And we have the biggest challenge, if you look at for India, is our youth bulge. We've got historically the largest youth bulge in human history. Okay, and we can call it a population dividend, provided we have the jobs. Since we do not have the jobs, it's called a youth bulge. And when something like this happens and your economy tanks, usually what happens is revolution. So one needs to be careful. This is our actual biggest problem. And ICT is the lowest hanging fruit if you want to, kickstart your economy. We have to, work very fast. We have to pressurize the government, because the government is under a lot of pressure by these big companies, who's combined, top 4-5 companies have got a GDP which is bigger than India. And that sort of money power is, and India is a place where they can actually make a difference. So these are certain recommendations which have flashed. I'll take it on in the question and answer session because time runs out. But I leave this for you to think. 60 years back, the Japanese were known for shoddy technologies. Okay, no one talks about Japan as a land of shoddy technologies today. 30 years back, we all know China was like us, maybe slightly even behind us. No one talks about that today. We are better placed. Okay, we've got a great human resource. We can do things, but what is lacking is a strategy. And why is that happening? Because it's being curated. It's our policies are curated to ensure that we do not take off. Thank you so much. Those are my details. I'll take on the questions. If anyone wants to further write into me, please do that, because I teach in this place. So I put that particular ID. I'm ready to, take on. Thank you so much. I hope it did make sense. Thank you, sir. Back to the chair.
Thank you, Pavitran. I think this is one of the finest presentations I have seen on this subject. And I think, as I see it, it complements in a major way what Admiral Kohli has said. I think the more we depend upon ourselves and we create a strategy, not only can we move forward with confidence and the ability that we'll be able to achieve or break the glass ceiling. So thank you very much for the presentation. I would now like to invite Namrata Ahuja to share her thoughts with us. Madam, you have 20 minutes. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Hebricker.
Thank you. Welcome.
I'm glad to be here today. As you said, that it took a while to organize this webinar. And why is this so important is because in the last decade, cyberspace is getting increasingly dominated by China. We all remember the 2010 Commonwealth Games in Delhi. While CWG became synonymous with scams, it also became synonymous with China-sponsored cyber attacks, at least 200 a day. So what were these cyber attacks really aimed at? It was easy to guess. They could hack into websites, steal official communication, steal the plans, disrupt games by leaking schedules, confidential data of participants. Besides managing these threats online, the Home Ministry was regularly briefing the media of how China had unleashed its young army on of the PLA to jeopardize the CWG. A very small example is how the government was then worried about a plethora of serious concerns about a 400 crore aerostat, the giant helium balloon that was the show stealer at the inauguration event. The CWG aerostat had cameras that gave a 360-degree view. It was another story that the aerostat neither failed nor was it hacked into, and later was offered to the DRDO for surveillance research. While the entire CWG games planning and execution was being driven by technology and internet, the threat was not only to the power systems handling the aerostat, it was also to the CNG stations, the automotive bus systems, and the Home Ministry was getting sleepless nights. It was the certain at that time that was busy battling these coordinated attacks. And soon after, the government proposed to set up a National Cyber Coordination Center to improve coordination between center and states, various other stakeholders. Largely what we saw and what we see today still is India has a graded mechanism to fight cyber attacks. We have, the National Crisis Management Center, we have a plethora of institutions. Now, a decade later, when China army is, when Indian army is trying to block the Chinese maneuvers in Galwan Valley and the LAC, it's once again battling the PLA's cyber offensive. And the PLA has only become more aggressive and definitely more equipped. India's multiple parallel institutions managing the cybersecurity infrastructure are alert and responding. But, what I think is that to push back China in the cyberspace, we are not adequately equipped still. The answer is definitely a no when it comes to whether India is really equipped to, handle cyber attacks. One example, as Mr. Heblikar mentioned, if we talk of the technology that China has been, targeting the Indian technology systems and the kind of inroads they have in not only, targeting India, but in the world space. We take the example of Huawei. Over the past decade, Huawei workers have teamed up with various members, various organs of the PLA on at least 10 research endeavors spanning artificial intelligence to radio communication. They include a joint effort with the investigative branch of the CMC, the Armed Forces Supreme Body, to extract, classify emotions in online video comments, and an initiative with the elite National University of Defense Technology to explore ways of collecting, analyzing satellite images and geographical coordinates. Those projects are just a few of the publicly disclosed studies that shed light on how staff at China's largest technology company teamed up with the PLA on research into an array of potential military and security applications. These projects constitute, elements of the 5G core network, and it would be naive on the part of anybody to consider that they have no backdoor from a Huawei 5G core network into the PLA. Let's talk of the collateral damage to Indian telecom networks. The dependency on imported 5G network equipments will put India at the risk of collateral damage at a time today when Chinese and Western nations, are targeting each other's equipment. China has reportedly been accused of rigging 5G security tests in a bid to discredit Western companies and protect Chinese telecom giants like Huawei. Beijing has been leaking details of security vulnerabilities in equipment made by Huawei's rivals to a 5G testing team as it looks to bolster the reputation of the controversial Chinese firm. The alleged campaign comes amid a large-scale security test with more than 100 IT experts carrying out hacking on telecom equipment to check for flaws, according to the report. The teams form part of preparations for the global rollout of 5G and are being carried out on equipments made by firms including Huawei and its two main competitors, Nokia and Ericsson. It has been indicated that Chinese state hackers have been passing information to 5G testers to ensure Nokia and Ericsson are found to produce unsecure network technology. Whatever is the case, it looks like Indian dependency on either Chinese or Western telecom 5G telecom equipments could see attacks and counterattacks in coming days. Another aspect, I would like to cover is of ZTE. So if, just give me a minute. So why 5G networks are also important is for 5G, the combination of competitive and geopolitical battles adds up to the ultimate worst case scenario for business. For businesses that make 5G enabled products and services, a patent war trapped in a trade war. So 5G weaponization is for real. The ZTE, is known for its connections today to the Chinese state. 30% of the Chinese telecommunication firm ZTE is owned by companies connected to the Chinese government. The PLA maintains liaison officers, inside systems that, manage these telecom companies. And while we talk of, the threats coming from China, are we really prepared? Is India really equipped to handle it? As one of the panelists was making, analogies of corporations to talk of cybersecurity, I would like to add that our cybersecurity management has too many cooks, and as the saying goes, too many cooks spoil the dish. Secondly, unlike the changed approach we are seeing towards border security today, the approach in cyber management is still defensive, and there is not enough preparation or thought to launch, a balakot or even a surgical strike in the cyberspace if the need arises. I think that's a big lacuna. Yes, we have the NSA who's in charge of the NSCS. He's the apex officer relating to national security. There is the NTRO, which is the Technical Intelligence Unit. We all know there is the NCIPC, there is the IT Act, and we have the National Cybersecurity Coordinator. He's a nodal officer for all cybersecurity threats and responses. Besides this, we have several ministries who have set up their own governing cybersecurity in the country. We have the IT ministry, we have the home ministry, we have the defense ministry, we have the external. So there's no dearth of institutions. Next comes policy. So most of it seems inadequate. All of them seem to be working not at cross purposes, but there's no coordinated cyber policy, which each one of them sit, on a regular basis and either prepare a cyber offensive strategy when it comes to cyber warfare. We need to flesh out a policy of proactive cyber defense with emphasis on actions, taking an anticipation to prevent an attack against computers. We certainly need to strengthen our cyber command and build up offensive capabilities and further create a pool of trained people. So as you were mentioning that we really don't want to, depend on, we can't recruit from abroad. I think we have enough minds and we have enough strategies as well as we have enough, skill to create cyber territorial army battalions, which can provide surge capacity to bolster the country's resources during critical periods like what we are seeing today, or in the event, in the event of hostilities. Cyber awareness is another key issue that is not focused much on. A couple of government institutions are doing brilliant research in this area. However, this potential remains limited due to weaknesses in outreach. To increase digital and cybersecurity awareness, a much wider dissemination of common vulnerabilities and exposures. Reports regularly need to be issued by the CERTIN and NCIPC to the public at large, who should be able to opt in and subscribe to receiving such updates in the form of newsletters, urgent updates, warnings. From personal experience, it's even difficult for the media as we disseminate information to access, the data or the kind of threats, that even the CERTIN is handling at certain stages. A lot of banks, companies, whoever is facing a lot of attack, it's more of a closed approach. Nobody wants to come forward and say that yes, this is the kind of strategy that has been employed in a certain cyber attack. So those can become case studies, learning experiences through media dissemination of information. It is also unfortunate to see when the EU is celebrating the General Data Protection Regulation, and even third world countries have come up with data protection laws. We've seen recent examples in Brazil, even Thailand considering a similar model. In India, despite the constitution of the Sri Krishna Committee, drafting of the data protection bill, it's yet to be enacted and it lies with a parliamentary panel. It definitely shows our failure as a strong data protection regime. Enough deliberations, consultations, and submissions on the bill have already taken place. It's high time it becomes a legislation. Another point is India is yet to have a coherent data sharing mechanism. This is what I was referring to. So for the establishment of the CERTIN and other sectoral CERTINs for the financial sector, power sector, that was an important step. However, it's yet to establish a multi-stakeholder cross-sectoral information sharing platforms where relevant threat information is shared, collated, analyzed for better understanding of existing and future threats. Setting up of such a platform could be under the public-private sector collaboration. India is also yet to come up with any policy on blockchain and cryptocurrencies and is unable to gain benefit of cutting-edge research on emerging technologies like these. There was a RBI circular in 2018 that had effectively blocked dealing in cryptocurrency. Nevertheless, on a positive side, the RBI is setting up a blockchain and cryptocurrency research unit to understand how to regulate these technologies is an encouraging step. Given their potential for cybersecurity, these emerging techs are already being used by several governments across the world, in Estonia, in Dubai, in Georgia, and Switzerland. Artificial intelligence is another area in which India is really lagging behind. Indian AI research is already behind other countries. Besides Niti Aayog's discussion paper on a national strategy for artificial intelligence, we have not been able to do much. Given the biases of AI, inclusivity should remain the key, along with focusing on economic growth. We should consider providing incentives for Indians abroad with specializations in AI, cloud computing, machine learning, and deep learning to return to India and contribute to AI development. India can also consider setting up initiatives on the lines of Israel's CyberSpark. Now, CyberSpark is concentrated and powerful cybersecurity ecosystem and consisting of Israeli startups, global companies, the academia, the civilians, the military cybersecurity centers, and they're all within walking distance of one another. We must,
Namrata, we have 3 more minutes.
yes. So we
Thank
must
you.
remind ourselves that the cyber world doesn't recognize international boundaries. In order to really benefit with close coordination with other countries, we need to really focus on treaties and mutual legal assistance treaties. The policy planning research division under the MEA needs to, chip in with like-minded nations facing similar issues in strengthening capacities. India should also consider articulating its own position, in the UN, at other international forums. We also need to, I'll briefly touch upon, how we need to classify, demarcate critical, non-critical data when we talk of India's cybersecurity setup. And, the critical information infrastructure of defense and strategic enterprises demands a high degree of inputs from intelligence agencies, and it can be retained with the defense ministry's hierarchy. However, with respect to civilian sectors, we need to have a bigger presence of the private sector in view of their centrality to sustaining, promoting India's economic growth, public-private partnerships, and a nodal agency, either entrusted with the Home Ministry with this responsibility. We also need to take care of cyber terrorism. The MHA has a certain division handling things, but again, it's working a bit in isolation, and it should be tasked with the responsibility of formulating, implementing a policy to deal with cyber terrorism. I believe we have a good warrior, one of the best armies we can have on cyber warriors. We need to really tap this tech-savvy, educated, professional, pool of people who can be skilled and reskilled to fill in this gap in cybersecurity. A lot of attention again to research and development, and also looking at budgetary constraints, which the cybersecurity really has today, also shows of how much importance we're really, attaching to this field. So keeping all these in points, I know I just had a few minutes to speak, so I would thank everybody, and I hope I provided, some food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Namrata. It was an outstanding presentation. We now, I think the first 3 speakers were all on the same page as to where we stand on our national preparedness. In terms of the suggestions you have made have been extraordinary, and combined with what Pavitran and Sanjeev has said, I think could now bring to the fore a picture as to where we stand and what are the next steps we need to take, and what are the small steps that we need to initiate in the beginning. I think we have the software, we have the hardware, we have the brains for it. I think the only thing that is lacking is support, institutional, both from the government and the private sector. Now, for our last speaker, I would like to invite Dr. Anuradha Rao. She is based in Singapore. She is likely to tell us what's happening from what does she see from overseas, the situation that we are confronted. And I think some of what she's going to say is going to add a lot to the discussions on this panel. Over to you, Dr. Anuradha.
Thank you, Mr. Hebika, and good afternoon, everyone, from a very sunny Singapore. It's an honor for me to be on this panel, and my fellow panelists have actually put together a really good and comprehensive idea of the kind of complexities that India is facing when it comes to having a coherent cybersecurity policy. So I am going to come at it from a slightly different angle. And if I could request Bala to play my PowerPoint so that I could sort of focus on the talk. Bala, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, great. So my presentation is going to focus on the role of citizen awareness in cybersecurity management. And this is something that Namrata briefly touched upon in her presentation. And it's something that I, as a social scientist, feel is the missing ingredient in a very robust cybersecurity framework, which is the people. So I'll just wait for my slides to show before I continue.
Yes, it's coming up.
Okay, thank you.
Is it visible?
No. Okay, it is now. Thank you, Bala. So we can move on to the next slide. So, and if you just press the next button. Yes. So if we look at cybersecurity in terms of people, technology, and processes, the technology and processes aspect are pretty straightforward. We need to have, as the panelists before me have spoken about, we need to have not only up-to-date technology and security software, but there's also a great need to indigenize our technologies in order to sort of ward off from foreign threats. That's one element. The more outdated our technology becomes, the more vulnerable we are to cybersecurity incidents. The threat vector becomes, the threat surface area becomes much larger. The next element is processes, and we could have really good technologies in place, but then we also need to have systems in place that are not only coherent, but as Namrata just pointed out, that actually need to be in sync with one another. So the Indian government appears to have very many different processes in place, but unless those systems and institutes are talking to each other, we're not going to get on this unified platform that we need to ward off the larger threat. I am going to be talking about an area that I am most familiar with, and that is people. As I just mentioned, I'm a social scientist. What that means is I'm looking at the weaknesses in terms of lack of citizen empowerment, or citizens in this case, I'll be saying netizens or internet citizens. The more and more of us are online, and with COVID-19, that has sort of flipped the way that we think of citizenship. So if we look at the commons, as Mr. Rajan has talked about, cyberspace as commons, we are looking at each of us as being part of the larger global internet commons. So in a way, citizenship is a bit fuzzy, not entirely state-based anymore. But those of us that have affinity to a nation state are also going to be foot soldiers in that nation state's larger aim to protect its borders and to protect its cyberspace from various threats. So I'm going to be talking about the role of citizens as individuals. We definitely need a government to be leading, taking this forward. But at the same time, I think we have to leave the idea that we are only dependent on governments to keep us safe. That era is long gone. We also are increasingly dependent on private sector to keep us safe, and that itself comes with a whole set of complications, because the private sector at its very core is there to make money. It's not there to keep us safe for its own sake. So where does that leave citizens increasingly, or netizens? It leaves us more and more to learn to fend for ourselves, and that is the state of affairs that we are in now. Each of us needs to be a cyber foot soldier. And I think this is what the aim of this conference is about, or this series of conferences, which the organizers had made this very clear, which is to get more people involved in the whole idea that cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility. So what role can, say, media professionals play? And Namrata talked about this. Media professionals have an important role in expanding just cognition or awareness that these threats are real, they're at our doorstep, and we can't keep our heads in the sand and say that it's someone else's responsibility. So this is what I do as part of my own company's work. Cyber Cognizance works on research, education, and awareness raising among citizenry. And I think the idea is to get more and more people involved in a multi-stakeholder effort to make cybersecurity available and awareness available for everyone. So I'm going to begin sort of with that context, keeping that larger context in mind. Next slide, please. So this is the basic premise on which I work. And my background is looking at a critical communication sort of framework. What does this mean? This means that as our cities, countries, the world gets more technologized, we also need to focus on how to make citizens smarter. Now, without the smarter citizen element, we can have excellent technologies and processes, but a single mistake by a single person in a single company or in their household is going to cost that institute or their family or their country a great deal. So if we work at it from that, the person at the center is the most important element. I think we can sort of make a small difference in a more enlightened netizenry. Next slide, please. So in what ways are we vulnerable? I think the first thing is, and a lot more people are part of this effort to increase knowledge about the fact that we are increasingly vulnerable in cyberspace. So human beings are the weakest link as well as the strongest asset in the fight against cyber threats. And I've already sort of made this clear. And we need to now know how our netizens are more vulnerable. So the first aspect is cybercrime. Bala, could you just press the next, yeah. And I'll get to that. There's so many types of cybercrime, and without the knowledge that we are vulnerable to these types of cybercrime, we're already sort of walking around in the dark, only being semi-aware of the threat possibilities. And so whoever is taking on or is going to be taking on this element of education and awareness has to factor in that cybercrime is around us. It's at any point in our lifetime, we are likely to become a victim of cybercrime. There is just no way around that. It may be a crime that is not as, it doesn't affect us to a greater extent, but it will affect us to some extent or someone around us. So we need to realize where the dangers lie. Next one, please. And next again. Sorry, I forgot to take out all the animations. But so once I talk about the dangers of cybercrime, I'm going to focus on fake news and misinformation. This is something that I work on. And I know that there is a panel on this tomorrow. And unfortunately, because of my teaching commitments, I'm not able to make it for that panel tomorrow. But I really wanted to bring in this element of fake news and misinformation and to show how netizen vulnerability comes in and how it's related to cybercrime and how it's related to national security and where citizen awareness comes in. So the idea is to kind of link all these together so that we really understand that we can't have one of the other, that they all are very, very linked. And before I continue to the next slide, I would just like to say that I'm in Singapore and I'm not looking at the India-China conflict I think from the same lens that the rest of you are. I'm looking at it from a more third-party, more dispassionate, so to speak, point of view. I'm looking at it in terms of cybersecurity gaps and vulnerabilities and advantages of both parties. So I sort of am coming with a different perspective to this webinar. So please bear with me as you see that it will be slightly different from what my previous panelists have presented. Next slide, please. So just very, very briefly, I think a lot of people I know on this panel are aware of this already. One of the things that I do, and I know that digital literacy efforts is on really focusing on what types of cybercrimes are out there. And I'm not going to go into this in detail, but I think this is a crucial element for us to incorporate in our cyber awareness efforts. That the ubiquity of cybercrime, as long as you have a phone or as long as you're connected to the internet, is just, I mean, it's almost taken for granted that it's going to happen at some point of time if we're not careful. Next slide, please. So I wanted to quickly talk about why I'm talking about, say, cybercrime in relation to national security. And there is a linkage between the two. If we look at cybercrime, particularly in relation to its definition that's taken for granted, it is that cybercrime is linked to financial motivations. But what happens when it gets a little fuzzy and cybercrimes like data breaches, phishing or hacking occur, and there is some evidence that links it to state-sponsored actions, or that it's linked to, say, a target that is a critical infrastructure target, or it's linked to a medical facility, right? So this moves us away from cybercrime to national security. And I think these are the kind of linkages that we also need to enable our citizens to see, to know that if a data breach occurs, that they have to report it somewhere. And so I think the processes should be in place to understand what is considered a cybercrime, when you have been a victim, and what are the steps to take thereafter. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about fake news and misinformation, because that's something that there is, that abounds, right? Everywhere we look, and even if we are not cognizant of it, we should be aware that misinformation surrounds us. And so one of the most recent the event that has happened and fake news has followed is the India-China conflict after the Galwan Valley clash that happened in June this year. And as we know, fake news follows every local, national, or global event for the last few years, but particularly with COVID-19, there was such a huge surge in fake news that it really took observers by surprise, and it really made people who are in the thick of action, like fact-checking websites, really rush to sort of figure out how to combat fake news on this extent, which they hadn't really faced before. And so if we look at the current India-China, so I wanted to bring in the India-China conflict in terms of fake news and misinformation. And I know that my panelists have brought it out in many other ways. And so this is what I'm going to be focusing on, which is that, and Namrata spoke about this, which is that we have cyber armies that are spreading propaganda and misinformation. And we also know, if I look at it dispassionately, that this happens all around the world. It is not specific to India or China or Russia or anyone else. But what we do know with some of the research that has been conducted is that the sophistication of the Chinese cyber army seems to be far superior than what we have seen in many other instances. And so even if we have fake news that emerges from the Indian side, the well-oiled Chinese cyber propaganda machine is already many steps ahead. And so this is another type of cybersecurity threat that emerges from information. And for those of you who know the term information warfare, is a huge aspect of cyber warfare. And propaganda has always played a role in geopolitics. And this is how propaganda comes back into the picture with fake news and information. And with social media, with more and more people on social media, what happens is there's again greater surface area for attacks to take place, because everyone has a social media account more or less. And so their ability to take in misinformation becomes much vaster if they aren't aware of how to sift fact from fiction. And
Dr. Rao, you have 3 minutes more, please.
Okay, sure. Next slide, please, Bala. Okay, we can skip this. Okay, so what I wanted to talk about is why is this related then to the whole idea of citizen awareness? At its core is the tactic of targeting civilians through cyber warfare tactics. And this, I feel, is a huge gap in cybersecurity policy and implementation. And not being in India, I actually want to raise this question to my fellow panelists. I would love to hear what is happening more about cybersecurity awareness. Is there a coherent policy? And I will talk a bit about what's happening in Singapore so that we understand what's happening here at least. Next slide, please. I'll skip this. We can talk about it later. Next slide. So what's happening in Singapore is Singapore realized, as being one of the most digital countries in the world, it realized a few years ago that a whole of society approach is needed to make boost citizen immunity. And Singapore comes at it from the point of view of digital literacy. Now, this involves providing skills and knowledge to people to being able to use digital resources effectively, like how do you look up information, how do you communicate well online, how do you make digital transactions. But there's also this element of critical digital literacy, which is only coming up much more recently. And this is the work that involves making people understand the critical aspects of new technologies and where the dangers lie. So can you go to the next slide, please? This is one of the examples of a public-private partnership that works to really disseminate information on cyber issues, on bullying, fake news. And so this is some of the examples that we could take and transplant in other contexts, say in India, for sort of making the internet a better place to be for everyone. Next slide, please. And so I work on issues of critical digital literacy, which is basically really talking about examining everything you see online with a critical lens. How is something, is it fake or not? Read up on how to determine what information looks to be fake. Is an image doctored? Let's talk about how images are doctored and get people to understand this better. The concept of ethical literacy is so important. What does ethical literacy mean? Understanding that new technologies could have impact on our lives, and keeping that in mind when we incorporate them into our lives. Without this understanding that new tech has an ethical lens, is really at the root of many problems when people are adopting technology in a top-down manner, but not using it to empower ourselves. And this is one aspect that, next slide, please, that Dr. Sansan Lim, who used to teach me at NUS, has talked about when she speaks about cross-cultural literacy, digital literacy, and ethical literacy, that we need to boost Singapore's innovativeness. So there's really this discussion about how these different types of literacies weigh in, not only in innovation, but in terms of keeping cyber awareness and cyber safety high on the agenda and getting a lot of people involved. So it just can't be top down. It has to be bottom up. It has to be multi-stakeholder. It has to be interactive. It has to be fun. You have to get people to want to learn these things. And that's the kind of message that sort of I am trying to bring to in general with my work, and work with several partners to do that. Next slide, please. So this is some of the aspects, and I'm almost done, just last two slides. What does critical digital literacy involve? How to seek reliable information, how to deal with information overload, something that even the smartest people in the room have trouble figuring out how to do this nowadays. How are you spreading information? Are you sharing information without thinking first? This is how fake news spreads, right? So getting people to think about their own practices in cyberspace. And again, we have the larger ethical questions of privacy, surveillance, misinformation. What are your values of technology? Is it convenience versus privacy versus security? So these are the larger ethical dilemmas that we'll have to discuss. And yes, my time is up. Thank you. Bala, last slide, please. And if you want to reach me, I give my details at the end of this slide. But basically, it's all about making us at the center of this whole boost to make cyberspace safer and stronger. It has to come from within, and it needs to tap into people that are willing and able and really have that drive to make the internet commons safer for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. I think you have covered the space in a very cogent and detailed manner. What is important in today's policy making is that cyber awareness, or the man on the street, or the housewife, or the school-going kid, are not usually part of a government context. I think you have very rightly brought to the fore, where does it begin? It has to be a bottom-up approach, where everybody is taken on board. Cyber awareness is equivalent to cyber literacy. And unless you don't invest in it, in time, research, and energy, we would not be in a fit position to take the battle forward. So in that direction, I think your contribution to the panel has been outstanding like the others. And one thing which I always, I think the four of you underline, like what often said in Singapore, be prepared, your response matters. I'll now request Bala to kindly take on the question answer part of the panel discussion. And later on, I will thank all the panelists myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. To begin with the question answer session, the first question is by Sri Rajan sir, who was asked, the challenge to think tanks and other policy and strategy institutions in India. Can you come up with match the big four and big tech in terms of influence? This question is directed to Pavitran sir.
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you match the big tech, big four and big tech? Yes, we definitely can, because we are a nation of immense size. Only thing is we lack the correct strategy and the policy initiatives for that. Okay, we definitely can. But does the government have the political will to do that? Is the first question. And is the government ready to identify who are the people who are curating these policies, who have curated and who are still occupying government positions and sending India down the drain? I say this with as a citizen with no malice. We have the Niti Aayog, doing policy initiative after policy initiative, which is harming India's economic and military security. I say this because unless we now raise our voice, I think we are, our future generations are going to be in huge trouble.
Thank you, sir. There is another question directed to Pavitran, sir. Mr. K.V. Thomas has asked, same like Chinese legislation covering sovereignty in cyberspace, even in India, we have the IT Act, the data protection, privacy legislations, etc. But the issue always comes up during the enforcement in a democratic framework. So unlike the command of PL or Xi Jinping, can you please offer your views, please?
Firstly, we do not have the Data Protection Act or the Privacy Act. Okay, these are acts which are still in the pipeline, which what has come out so far is an NGO for not-for-profit called Vidhi, and lawyer who was totally against privacy and who argued against privacy is making that, curating that particular act as we speak. This is the evidence, therefore. And the people who are behind it, this is Omdiyar Foundation and the who is who of the ITES industry of India. So if we look at the truth, there you have it. We do not even have a law. And let us be very frank, the IT Act, which has come up in India, came up with the sole purpose of enabling the ITES industry. That was during a time where we thought, oh, this is going to be the future. That is long past. Like I pointed out, other nations have immediately post-Snowden done course corrections. Here we have continued to sing paeans about the cyber commons. In fact, let me correct Dr. Anuradha. Although I gave the heading of cyber commons to introduce, I am a person who argues there is no cyber commons. It's a fallacy. It has been pushed to curate discussions in such a way and fool the people. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. There is another question by Commodore Vasan, sir. This question can be taken up by both Pavitran, sir, as well as Admiral Kohli, sir. We can call it the perils of democracy. We have objections to electronic voting machines, the Aadhaar, Arogya Setu app, or any such initiative, seriously. But how can this be overcome? Because the same people who have concerns on privacy issues and data breach have no qualms in granting all permissions to various apps on their mobile phones and systems. How can this be addressed?
So I will allow my senior, Admiral Kohli to take that on once he is finished. And if he feels that I need to add on, I will add on.
Admiral Kohli, sir?
He needs to unmute himself first.
Yeah. So, the base has to be that government has to be more accountable. The first step has to be the confidence building measure has to be from the government. Like I said in my presentation, government is one of the biggest users of data. And unless government brings out data privacy laws and data protection laws and subjects its institutions to these laws, the confidence of public would be difficult to come by.
So let me add on
Yes.
here. Firstly, when you say that citizens are freely giving away their data by agreeing, this is true. You have not gone into the aspects of human cognition. We as a species has evolved over the last 300,000 odd years, and we are able to detect a lot of things in the physical domain, what is correct, what is not correct. In the cyber domain, we are not. and the cyber domain has come up very, most of the occurrences in the cyber domain is curated by, studying human cognition. They have studied how your brain works, and their whole aim is to ensure that your normal defenses come down. That is how the industry has pushed it. Now, I wouldn't say it is the industry. The very idea of the internet, when it was started off by DARPA, was for population control. They created the internet in the 60s when they were fighting the Vietnam War. And what has come up is a mercantilist method of pushing certain narratives and for wealth creation. Let us clearly understand this. And once you understand this truth, and then we decide, okay, as a country, this is what we need to protect it. Smart young people will start, exploiting this and pushing the narratives to earn a living. That is what is happening today. There are people who want to start off a small business, and they look at in business they only look at profit at the fastest scale. So where is the profit lying? Pushing the American narrative or pushing the Chinese narrative. There is no profit in pushing the Indian narrative. There you have it.
Bala, before we move on to the next question, I'd just like to respond to Mr. Rajan's idea of cyberspace as commons, because I think both of us have diametrically opposite views. And I just wanted to say the way that I approach it, just to clarify, is that the fact that the internet today is considered a commons in terms of the fact that we cannot live without it. It's as integral to our society as air, water, food, and shelter. From that point of view, the global internet commons is something that everyone has equal rights to have a portion of and equal responsibilities to keep safe. So that's when we talk about the global cyber commons from a social science point of view. That's where I'm bringing that in. So that's the definition.
So can I also respond, to this, Bala?
Please, sir.
Because we need to clarify this fundamental thing. Although air, water, etc. are not commons, it's the domain of that space which is not under a national space, which is commons. Now, when you think about internet, the internet is totally controlled by the US because they control through the DNS servers, root servers. So, for example, when we push our entire economy into the digital space, tomorrow, if the US decides to switch off the DNS, our entire digital economy will collapse. Because within in spite of you having different instances, which are there in India, that will only function for a week, and it will start slowly dissipating. So, if that be so, it cannot be a commons. They control it. Now, I understand Anuradha's viewpoint, because today she is sitting in Singapore, a nation state, a city state, okay, which is totally part of the Western setup, where when I look at the per capita income of Singapore, US does not see the Singapore state as a threat, because even if they have a higher per capita income than the US. Now, China is just come into the middle income status, and the US sees it as a threat. Okay, now look at India. If we rise up as one political entity, okay, and try to achieve half of the per capita income of a Singapore, we will be the largest, most powerful nation in the world. And in the realm of realism, where the world order is constructed, they do not look at intentions, that we are dharmic in nature, we have no aggressive this. They only look at purely capabilities, because intentions can always change. That is what has happened with China. Just about 5 years back, it was all Hindi Chini, bye-bye again. Today, we are not saying that. Okay. In 1971, it was the US which moved an aircraft carrier to threaten us. Today, it is in India, US, bye-bye. Tomorrow, it might not be. That is the whole idea of a nation. Your interests are, we have to base our policy on realism and not on idealism, because therein India has a history of 1,000 years of being ruled, colonized, ruled over, and attacked. So, although with all due respects to Dr. Anuradha, I thoroughly am, she's from my town, Bangalore, okay, and I totally understand why she is saying so, but I would like to respectfully disagree. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Considering the time constraint, moving on to the next question. It is addressed to Ms. Namrata. How is the media government interface working in China? What more can be done by media houses in India to serve our national interests?
I think what we are seeing in China, and if we really think that the China, that's my personal view, government media interface in China is any day better ours? I don't think so. I think what they do is it's it's a CCP model in China. They control, they control companies, they control them, how the media works. So media houses, or whether they're telecom companies, or whether it's the army, or whether it's their response, it's all state controlled. So that's the way China is trying to drive the narrative today in the world. But I don't think that's working. Even today, despite all the onslaught by China on media during the COVID pandemic, or whether it's the kind of cyber armies they have, or even, as I talked about, the strength of the PLA. Despite all of this put together, China is facing a lot of criticism today. It's being criticized by the world, So if we talk of information warfare or cyber warfare, they still cannot control the global narrative on China. So rather than learning from China, thinking that we as a democracy, as a free press, we really cannot have state-controlled or state-driven, government media interface. So comparing the two models will never work, even if we, strive towards that. We need a free press, we need criticism, we need checks and balances, and we need to drive a policy based, a response based on our, as you said, not idealism but realism. So to actually drive it with criticism, to really have the government do things that are needed to be done in terms of bolstering our capacities or R&D, and push very insightful, thoughtful ways of approaching the whole issue of how the government media interface really needs to work, not just in the cyberspace, but in terms of how policies are made, which will in turn drive the cyber issue. So we cannot really just think of how we're going to drive cyber the threats posed by China in isolation, but in terms of how we really approach China. So if we go back to 20 steps back, and then see how India-China relations have really used, as you rightly pointed out, in Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai and all of that. So then suddenly what happens when Galwan happens? So are we really have a knee-jerk reaction, or do we really have a coherent China policy? That's my approach. So if we go back into driving a national security policy again, not just a China policy. So do we really have a national security doctrine that's governing our relations with the US or with China or with the world? So the answer is no. And then we want to respond to cyber threats in isolation, deal with another issue in isolation, border security in isolation. So what we really need to go back, one of the point that I'm trying to make is, we need to have a national security policy first that governs interministerials, all stakeholders, public, private, government, all together, and then look at China, or that will automatically flow. So it's all interrelated. And to have a China appeasement policy when one government is in power, here comes politics. So all of it is pretty linked up. So that's how we need to really go back and see. We need to have, irrespective of which government is in power, we need to really strengthen our democratic structure by having coherent security policies first, and then deal with China.
Thank you, ma'am. I thank all the speakers and the participants for bringing useful discussions to the table. With this, I would like to hand over to Heblika, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, and I would like to thank my panelists for their excellent presentation. We have gone over the various aspects of what China has done, what China is capable of doing. We also try to understand what is it that India is capable of doing, and what is necessary to forge those weapons for practical use in defending ourselves, or, as suggested, take the battle into the enemy camp. I would like to thank Admiral Kohli, Pavitran, Rajan, Namrata, and Anuradha for their contribution. I'm grateful that you found time to come and talk to us. To me, this webinar is a matter of national interest. And the more we talk about what is happening, the more information is generated for people who would like to make policies, or who would like to create new synergies for the future. Now that the General Rajesh Pant has joined, I would like to now hand over the proceedings to Mr. Shashi Nair. Thank you all. Thank you very much.